So in this lecture, we'll finish our foray into the Hindu pantheon, those figures who have, since the time of the early Puranas, received the greatest share of popular devotion, or bhakti. And here again is the image of the classic Trimurti, Brahma, who gets little to no active worship, Shiva, whom we talked about last time, and Vishnu, who is the maintainer or sustainer. His name means to pervade. And as the maintainer or sustainer, he is understood to be always present in all things. Devotees of Vishnu are known as Vaishnavas or Vaishnavites, and they often worship Vishnu in the form of one of his 10 avatars. An avatar is a form in which Vishnu appears on earth. Here's a picture of those avatars, and you can go online to find extensive descriptions of and stories about each one of them. But the one I want to draw your attention to here is the one pictured in the upper right corner. It's the Buddha. We haven't covered Buddhism yet, I know, but what's happening here is something that we see often in the context of religion. The central figure in Buddhism, the Buddha, is understood within the context of Hinduism to be actually an embodiment of a Hindu god. So in this way, Buddhism is sort of co-opted, its authority usurped, and its narrative subsumed into the larger and, for Hindus, more important frame of Hinduism. And here's an image from the Gita Govinda that is dated to the 16th century. It shows one characteristic of Vishnu. He's a bit of a ladies' man in a lot of narratives. And here he's being doted upon by many beautiful women. It's part of Vishnu's story that he is he's quite enamored with this kind of attention. He enjoys it a lot. And so devotees today will often, when they're worshipping especially Vishnu, do so with a kind of eroticized devotionalism, and oh, you're so beautiful devotionalism. I love you, I love you, I love you, the great lover that is Vishnu. So here's an image from the Bhagavad Gita, which you read an excerpt of. In this epic, the Bhagavad Gita is an excerpt from the Mahabharata, and in this epic, Krishna, who is one of Vishnu's avatars, acts as the hero, Arjuna's divine charioteer, leading him into battle and giving him a great deal of spiritual counsel along the way. So you have read a chapter of that. And here's an illustration of a moment from the other great Indian epic, the Ramayana, which is the tale of Rama, the ideal king. Rama is another of Vishnu's avatars, and here he's being carried along with his wife Sita on the shoulders of the divine monkey warrior named Hanuman, who is within this text a hero of devotionalism, so completely dedicated to Rama and to Sita that their faces, often just Rama's face, are emblazoned physically upon his heart, which in some images he shows you by ripping open his chest. And this is a still from a movie that I recommend to you, and that's available on YouTube. It's called Sita Sings the Blues, and it's a 2008 retelling of the Ramayana, which concentrates on Sita's experience and is set to 1920s and 1930s American jazz. So check that out. It's pretty good. And now we'll turn to the women. This is the Tridevi, the female answer to the Trimurti. On the left is Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth, of material fulfillment. And so she's the consort of Vishnu. This makes sense in that to maintain this life, as Vishnu does, one needs material fulfillment. One needs to pay the bills. So she's often pictured with gold coins overflowing from her outturned and very generous hands. On the right of this image is Sarasvati, the goddess of learning, the arts, of cultural fulfillment. So she's often pictured with instruments of music, of writing, and of creation. And as the goddess who fosters learning and creativity, she's the consort of the creator god, Brahma. Now, in the center is Parvati. She is understood to be the ideal wife, the ideal lover. She's the goddess of love and of spiritual fulfillment. And her connection to Shiva is a little more mind-tickling or mind-bending than the other two, which more clearly or easily fit their partners. But we might think of it like this: destruction or transformation. These powers, the powers of upturning, of leaving behind the past so that one might embrace an uncertain but new future, these powers are powers that we need in the context of love and spirituality. The acceptance of and control over change, the meditative equipoise in the face of changes we often initiate ourselves. How well would that serve you as you navigate through the difficult questions of love and spiritual truth? the complicated and often unanswerable questions of love and spiritual truth. So that's a more interesting connection to my mind. Now, in her negative aspect, Parvati takes on the form of Kali. Among others, she also is Durga often, but we're just going to look at Kali. But Kali is probably the most popular. The multiple forms that Parvati takes on point again to that trend in Hinduism that I've mentioned now so many times, the proliferation of divine forms that represents a balance of energies. Kali receives an enormous amount of devotion, and despite the skirt of human arms and the necklace of severed heads and the blood-red tongue, she's seen not as scary so much as powerful, a powerful protectress. And in this image, she's called upon and unleashed to end a war of gods and demons, but she's gone too far, taken that energy of negativity and run with it. And once she started killing, once she gave herself over to that ferocity and anger, she couldn't stop. And we know something about this in life, the way that energy can act as its own engine of self-propulsion, sort of reproducing itself, creating more and more of itself, and how we can lose control. Well, she did, and she was set to destroy the universe and all things in it. And again, in a move of self-sacrifice and spiritual strength, Shiva lays himself down in her path, knowing that once she stood in anger and ferocity upon the body of her consort, she would stop. That would calm her. Shiva knew that the energies of anger and violence would be no match for the responsibilities of love. And she did stop. It worked. So the universe was saved. Now, the last figure we'll look at is incredibly beloved. This is Ganesha, or Ganesh. He's the lord of obstacles, which means that he both creates and destroys obstacles, obstacles that are both spiritual and material. He's the lord of letters and of learning, which, as you're a student in a class, you can sort of see that there are obstacles there, and honoring and offering bhakti devotion to the god of obstacles might help you in this learning, this new development, right? He's the lord of letters, of learning, and the lord of the liminal, or the in-between. And as that lord of the liminal, he's worshipped by traders and merchants, those who deal at the margins. Ganesh is the son of Shiva and Parvati, and stories of his conception, birth, and transformation abound. One thing about Hinduism is that it's not a tradition that is attached to a singular version of any given story. It has no problem accepting multiple conflicting narratives that are understood to get at the truth of these divine figures and of spiritual life just from different angles, It's not like there's a right story out there, because it's not like there's a right path to follow, because life is more complicated than that. And this tradition sort of narratively expresses this in its multiple stories. So in a classic story of Ganesha's birth, the goddess Parvati has just had it with her husband, Shiva. She needed a break from him constantly invading her privacy and wanting sex, always more sex. So she decides to create a door guard and makes him out of the oils of her bath, or sometimes out of her menstrual blood, depending on which version we're looking at. The sweat of Shiva somehow gets mixed in, and Ganesh comes alive. Now, some stories say that the couple didn't yet have natural children because Shiva didn't want to have sex for reproduction, only for fun. He was adamant about that. So he wouldn't give Parvati a natural son. Anyway, Parvati places this handsome warrior on guard. And in many temples today, you have to pass Ganesh to get to the god or goddess you're aiming for. He is the lord of the liminal, of the betwixt and between, of entrances. And at his birth, he's placed between Shiva and Parvati. So Shiva comes home to find this stranger blocking his way to his own wife. And there's a great struggle. Some say Vishnu comes to Shiva's aid. Others say that Shiva cuts off Ganesh's head when Ganesh knocks Vishnu down. However it happened, Ganesh's head gets cut off, and Parvati is angry, to say the least. She calls her army of Shaktas, or divine feminine forms, and threatens to destroy the universe, the world as we know it. So the men all go off to find a new head to appease her, and the first one they find is an elephant, which they attach, and so Ganesh lives with the head of an elephant. Another story says that Shiva and Parvati thought it would be fun to have sex in the form of elephants, and so Ganesh is born as an elephant. In another story, Ganesh is born from Shiva's laugh. And both of these other stories get a little more closely at the playful nature of Ganesh. He's a jokester, he's a prankster, he's a god who likes to laugh. And this playful aspect is one of the things that makes him so very popular. However it came to be, he's an elephant, which it's worth remembering is like the tank and the bulldozer of the ancient world. and also a figure that is understood to be in harmony with the non-natural or the non-human natural world that surrounds us. And this aspect of Ganesh, through which he's seen as being in harmony with the non-human environment, is coming up in conflicted ways in our environmentally conscious era. Every year on Ganesh's feast day, it's a popular practice to build a statue of the god, like you see here, paint it, and immerse it into a river. The holier the river, the better. So if you're close to the Ganges, that's where you want to dunk your Ganesh. But as you might imagine, all the toxic paints and plasters are polluting India's rivers. And dealing with this has been a great challenge for India, where there's a long-standing cultural belief that the rivers, especially the Ganges, are so sacred that they cleanse whatever enters them, and they cannot themselves be polluted. So it's a challenge to work through that long-standing cultural knowledge into a world where people change their devotional practices, and change is happening, and people are starting to use non-toxic paints, and they're starting to pull the Ganesh statues back out of the river when they're done, but slow going. Now, partially for the meaning, the great stories that underlie his narrative, and partially for his imagistic appeal, Ganesh has become recently increasingly popular in the U.S. He's a very popular subject for tattoos, and a quick Google image search will show you hundreds, and some of them are pretty incredible. Here's one. And we'll close with this, a local question, right? There was some debate about whether or not it's okay to use a stylized image of Ganesh as the label for a beer bottle. Indica IPA did it, and they haven't changed it, despite the kerfuffle that it caused. So here's a question, that I'll leave you with, and that's worth thinking about, especially as we move into our units on so-called Eastern traditions. Is this kind of cultural appropriation appropriate? Is it offensive? And why or why not? Think through both sides. This is a good discussion topic for your forums if you want to address it. It's something about which people have widely various opinions. It's like you're using a sacred image to decorate a beer bottle, which is in most contexts not understood to be sacred, and yet why does it make sense? Well, this is an IPA, which is, a beer developed because the trip across the ocean, you had to have really hoppy beer to make the beer, otherwise it would go bad, okay? So there's a lot of hops in IPA, that's why it gives you headaches. And Ganesh is the lord of obstacles. How does that make sense for alcohol, right? I don't know. I have no right answer, but it's a good discussion topic. So next time we'll turn to the widely appropriated practice of yoga, going back in time a little bit to look at its roots, and then into the world of today to look at its contemporary manifestations.